What if your ability to focus, really focus, became the most valuable skill you could possibly master in today's economy? What if it's not just about productivity, but about meaning, success, and your future relevance? Welcome to Grow Leap Academy. In this first episode of our two-part deep dive into deep work by Cal Newport, we're exploring the why. Why is deep work not only rare, but rapidly becoming the ultimate competitive edge in the information age? Why do so few people practice it, even when it's the key to excellence in almost every field? And most importantly, why could cultivating deep work be the most meaningful shift you make in your professional life? We're breaking it all down, from how our economy rewards focus, to why shallow work dominates modern workplaces, to the hidden satisfaction that only deep work can bring. Let's dive in.
All right, welcome in everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into something absolutely essential for, really getting your best work done. We're talking about deep work.
Deep work.
And, you know, the term itself might sound kind of trendy or whatever, but the core idea here, this idea of like really focused, uninterrupted effort, the kind that actually generates value, helps you build your skills, helps you move forward, that's timeless.
Absolutely.
That's been around forever.
Yeah.
And really what we're talking about is unlocking this ability to really concentrate, really produce at a high level.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've really been digging into some excerpts from this really interesting book that explores this entire concept. So we're going to be talking about why it matters so much, especially in today's world, and also, how to cultivate it in your own life, how to bring it into your own work. So our mission is to give you a really solid understanding of why deep work is so valuable, why it often feels so hard to achieve, and some initial thoughts on how to get more of it in your life.
Yeah, and to kind of illustrate why this is so crucial, why this matters, just think about Carl Jung. Like this guy, this groundbreaking psychologist, right?
Yeah.
He built himself a stone tower.
A tower.
Yeah.
Wow.
A literal, like physical space, like just totally set apart from everything else.
Yeah.
And he built that specifically for his deep thinking and his writing. And that's a pretty significant commitment, right? To actually step away from the everyday and create that kind of focused environment.
Oh.
But for him, for Jung, it was essential to developing his revolutionary ideas.
Makes sense.
So that's one example. And then, you fast forward to a more contemporary example. There's a guy, Venn.
Okay.
And he basically recognized that his focus wasn't really where he wanted it to be. It's kind of scattered.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to learn to code.
Okay.
So he decided, like, you know what, I'm gonna take a radical step here. And he essentially isolated himself, like just with his learning materials, really forcing his brain to just concentrate without distraction. No TV, no internet, just coding.
So like completely went off the grid kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And it was a challenge, like at first.
I bet.
It was tough, but he kept at it.
Yeah.
And he built up this ability to really focus intently for longer and longer periods.
So it's like he was training his focus muscle in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And the impact was pretty remarkable for him,
Okay.
After just 2 months of this like intense focus study, he not only aced this really tough coding boot camp, but he landed a high-paying job in Silicon Valley.
Wow.
Like significantly increased his income,
That's impressive.
Yeah, so he's like, a total believer in this, in prioritizing deep work.
Yeah.
And he dedicates like hours every day to focus programming even before his regular workday even starts.
Wow. Okay, so both of those stories, from Jung's tower to Ben's focused isolation, they kind of highlight this core principle. Achieving excellence, whether it's in some kind of, profound intellectual work or mastering a skill like coding, it demands this ability for deep, concentrated effort, right?
Right.
And that's really what we want to dig into here with you today. Like how developing this ability can be a key to your own success, in whatever you're working on.
Yeah, and to understand that, I think it's good to kind of unpack why our sources argue that deep work is so valuable, especially right now.
Okay.
So, it's not a secret, right? We've moved away from an economy that was based largely on, industrial production
Right.
to one that's much more driven by information and knowledge.
Yeah.
And in this new landscape, in this information economy, the ability to focus deeply, it's becoming, really your most valuable asset.
Yeah, it's what separates the people who are really thriving from those who are just, staying busy, just keeping their heads above water.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's the new currency, right? For knowledge work.
Exactly.
And the material we've looked at, it describes how high-speed data networks and all these collaboration tools that are readily available now, they've led to what are essentially winner-take-all markets in a lot of fields.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so think of it this way, right? If someone anywhere in the world can access the absolute best in a certain profession, just as easily as a local option, right?
Yeah, right.
The best tend to capture a dominant share.
So it levels the playing field in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
And this, this actually kind of echoes the work of this economist, Sherwin Rosen, who studied how even small differences in talent can lead to huge market advantages for what he called superstars.
Okay.
So you can, you see this with someone like David Heinemeier Hansson, who created, Ruby on Rails. His ability to produce something truly innovative, it had this outsized impact. But, it's not just about being a superstar in that traditional sense,
Right.
The sources also highlight the importance of being an owner.
An owner.
Yeah. So this is someone who can effectively leverage and work with intelligent machines.
So like mastering AI and all that.
Yeah. Like think about someone like Nate Silver,
Okay.
who uses these sophisticated statistical models to forecast elections.
Right.
For him, intelligent technology isn't a threat. It's actually a necessary tool.
Yeah.
But here's the critical connection, right?
Okay.
Whether your goal is to be like a top performer in your field,
Right.
or to really master these advanced technologies, the ability to consistently produce at an elite level, it's just crucial.
Yeah.
Like raw talent or potential, those things are great,
Right.
but they're not enough. You got to be able to translate that into valuable, tangible results.
Yeah. Like you said with Hanson, right? It's coding and releasing Ruby on Rails, not just having the idea for it. And with Silver, it's actually taking that statistical expertise and then applying it to, election forecasting in a way that's both insightful and that people can actually understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So then the question becomes, well, how do you cultivate that ability?
Yeah.
How do you cultivate that ability to produce at that kind of an elite level? And one of the things our sources point to is deliberate practice.
Deliberate practice. Oh,
Yeah. So this isn't just about, putting in the hours,
right.
Going through the motions.
Yeah.
It requires this intense focus on a specific skill that you're actively trying to improve, right?
Okay.
And it's got to be coupled with consistent feedback, so you can constantly kind of refine your approach.
So you're not just repeating, you're repeating with intention, with this clear goal of getting better.
Right. And distraction, distraction just can't coexist with that kind of focused effort. And what's really fascinating is that there's this whole underlying neuroscience to this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the development of myelin.
What, myelin?
Yeah, this fatty substance that insulates the nerve fibers in your brain.
Yeah.
It plays a huge role in this.
Right.
When you practice a skill with focused attention, the myelin around the relevant, neural pathways, it thickens.
Okay.
And that makes those pathways more efficient, allowing signals to travel, faster and more reliably.
So you're literally like building stronger, faster connections in your brain for the skills you're trying to develop.
Yeah. It's amazing. But, even if you're not juggling multiple tasks at the exact same moment, right?
Yeah.
Just constantly switching between different kinds of work can still really hinder your ability to focus deeply.
Okay.
And Sophie Leroy, she coined this term attention residue.
Attention residue. Interesting.
Yeah, and this is to describe this phenomena where even after you've mentally moved on to a new task, a part of your attention remains kind of tethered to the previous one.
Oh, I see. Like your brain hasn't fully offloaded the previous task yet.
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
that's like, it's like mental baggage that kind of weighs you down, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So we've talked about, the importance of deep work, especially in this modern economy that we're in.
Right.
We've talked about how it's really fundamental for high level production, for mastering these complex skills, for just thriving, whether you're aiming to be at the top of your field, or you want to be someone who can really use advanced technology effectively. But that naturally leads to the next question, right?
Right.
Which our sources also address, which is, if it's so valuable, why is it so rarely practiced? Why aren't people doing it more?
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting because our sources highlight several, pretty powerful trends in the modern workplace.
Yeah.
That actively undermine our ability to concentrate deeply.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just think about open office spaces, for instance.
Yeah.
Companies like Facebook and Square, they've championed this design, often with the idea of fostering, spontaneous collaboration and creativity and all that.
Right.
But the evidence, and frankly, a lot of people's personal experience suggests that these open plans, they're often incredibly disruptive to focused work.
Yeah. It's like, if you're sharing a workspace with, a ton of other people, there's just inevitably going to be, noise and interruptions.
Yeah, yeah.
And it just makes it really hard to concentrate for any extended period of time. There was even a piece in Bloomberg Business Week that basically made this case for moving away from the tyranny of the open plan office because of its impact on productivity.
Yeah, yeah, it's a real thing. And then you've got this pervasive pressure for constant connectivity, right?
Wow.
Just, we see examples of this, even at the highest levels, like Kerry Trainor, the CEO of Vimeo. He admitted that even just like a significant portion of a Saturday, without checking email feels like a struggle.
Wow.
And that expectation of always being available, it tends to just permeate entire organizations,
Oh.
It's not just the CEO, it's everyone.
It trickles down.
Yeah. And then another other factor is this growing expectation for content creators, even in fields that, traditionally demand deep work, like journalism and literature.
Mm-hmm.
They're expected to maintain this big presence on social media.
Oh, yeah.
Like the New York Times, they now encourage their journalists to be active on Twitter.
Wow.
And when Jonathan Franzen, the novelist, he expressed concerns about Twitter's impact on serious writing.
Right.
He faced a lot of criticism for that. Yeah, yeah. And George Packer, who's a really respected writer for the New Yorker, he's explicitly voiced his apprehension about platforms like Twitter. He described it as potentially addictive, and he was worried about its detrimental effect on his ability to do the kind of sustained deep work that's required for writing his books.
So you have all these powerful trends that really seem to discourage deep work. But why do they persist? Why do they persist in the business world?
Yeah, that's a good question. And our sources actually introduce this thing they call the principle of least resistance.
The principle of least resistance.
Yeah. So basically, in a business environment, especially when the direct impact of different work styles on the bottom line, isn't always immediately clear, there's this natural tendency to gravitate towards what feels easiest or most comfortable in the short term.
Oh, okay. So it's like in the moment, it often feels easier, and maybe even more productive to be constantly connected and responsive. Like you get that quick answer to a question through instant messaging, and it feels like you've accomplished something,
Yeah, right.
Even though you're actually constantly interrupting deeper, more important work. There's this really interesting analysis done by Cochrane on the cost of email at Atlantic Media.
Oh, wow.
And they found out that they were spending like over $1 million annually just on processing emails.
Wow.
Which is, that's a huge financial drain that you might not even think about. And then there was also Leslie Perlow. Her research showed that when consultants were actually encouraged to disconnect more regularly, their performance actually improved.
Wow. That's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But it makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah. And then another reason why deep work can be so scarce is that there's often this really ambiguous feedback loop surrounding its value. especially in knowledge work roles, right? So unlike someone in a trade, like a motorcycle mechanic who can see a tangible result when a bike is repaired, it's often harder to directly measure the output and the impact of deep focused thinking in a lot of office jobs.
Yeah.
Like Richard Feynman, who was this brilliant physicist, he even developed a strategy of feigned irresponsibility to protect his deep work time. Like he would deliberately avoid these administrative tasks that would, kind of fragment his concentration.
Wow. And that's someone who, was operating at the highest levels of his field.
Exactly. And then Matthew Crawford, who actually transitioned from a think tank to opening a motorcycle repair shop, he talked about this, about escaping the bewildering psychic landscape of knowledge work where it's often hard to feel that sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
So this lack of clear metrics can lead people to default to just visible busyness, responding to emails, attending meetings, even if those things are ultimately shallow and they don't contribute to any significant output.
Right. So it's like the system itself, the way work is structured kind of incentivizes busyness over deep, meaningful work.
Yeah. And then finally, our sources discuss the influence of what they call technopoly. Yeah. So this is kind of a cultural mindset that prioritizes technology above all else. So the idea is that anything related to the internet or digital tools is often seen as inherently beneficial and necessary, regardless of its actual impact on productivity or the quality of the work being done. And those more traditional values like craftsmanship and mastery, which are so fundamental to deep work, they can be undervalued in favor of, this perceived importance of being constantly engaged with the latest technological trends. So deep work, can struggle to gain traction against the constant allure of all these digital distractions simply because they exist, because they're there,
Yeah.
And they're often seen as being inherently valuable just because they're new, they're shiny, they're part of the digital world.
Right. So we've explored why deep work is so valuable in our current economy, why it's becoming increasingly rare because of all these, workplace and technological pressures.
Right.
But the third crucial point that emerges from our sources is that deep work isn't just, good for your career. It's actually a significant source of meaning and satisfaction in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And one example of this is this master craftsman, Rick Furr. He meticulously recreates Viking-era swords using these ancient techniques.
Wow.
And his work demands just incredible concentration. Like even a momentary lapse in focus can ruin hours of really painstaking effort.
Yeah.
Yet it's clear that he derives just profound meaning from this demanding, deeply focused work.
Yeah, it's like there's something inherently satisfying about mastering a craft. Matthew Crawford talks about this too. In his work, he highlights these inherent satisfactions of mastering a physical skill. And there's this fascinating kind of hidden benefit to this intense level of concentration, which is when you're truly immersed in deep work, it just occupies your attention so completely that you don't have the mental bandwidth to dwell on all those smaller anxieties and frustrations of daily life.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and Csikszentmihalyi Mihaly, he's done a ton of research on flow.
Flow, yeah.
And his research supports this idea that deep engagement in a challenging task, it just leaves no attentional space for irrelevant thoughts or worries.
So it's almost like a form of meditation in a way.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that.
Interesting. And our sources even provide examples of the kinds of shallow, often meaningless emails that can just eat away at our focus, that can detract from more meaningful work.
Right.
Like endless meeting scheduling, getting caught up in, office gossip. These tasks, they might feel pressing at the moment, but they often lack, that intrinsic reward of creating something through focused effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And Winifred Gallagher, reflecting on her experience with cancer, she came to this realization that living a focused life, intentionally choosing what to give her attention to and engaging with it fully was the the most fulfilling way to live.
Mm-hmm.
And this really speaks to the deeper satisfaction that comes from intentionality and deep engagement in whatever you choose to do, right?
Right. And there's actually a compelling philosophical argument here that draws from Dreyfus and Kelly's book, All Things Shining. And they talk about the modern world's tendency to lose sight of sacred, shining things.
Okay.
You know, those aspects of life that inspire awe and give us a sense of meaning.
Yeah.
And deep work, with its inherent emphasis on craftsmanship and skill, it allows individuals to really appreciate and find meaning in their work, regardless of the specific nature of the job.
Yeah, they use this really powerful analogy from the pragmatic programmer about medieval quarry workers.
Oh, interesting.
You know, who are chipping away at stones. You know, they envision themselves as contributing to this grand design of a cathedral, right? So even seemingly mundane tasks, they can become a source of profound meaning when approached with skill and dedication.
Yeah. It's not just about the job title, right?
Right.
It's about the skill and the appreciation that's inherent in craftsmanship that you bring to the task.
Exactly. It's about adopting this rarefied approach, you know, to your work that's enabled by cultivating these deep work habits, and that can transform almost any knowledge work job into something much more satisfying, because the very act of developing that level of skill and appreciation, it inherently requires deep focused effort. So engaging in deep work, it's not just a strategy for, you know, boosting productivity. It's a pathway to a more meaningful, a more fulfilling professional life.
Absolutely.
So just to kind of recap here, we've explored why deep work is increasingly essential for thriving in our modern information economy, right?
Right.
We've also examined the reasons why it's becoming so rare, from the distractions of open offices to the constant demands of our digital world.
Yeah.
And finally, we've discussed how cultivating this ability to work deeply can lead to a more meaningful and satisfying professional existence.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really important point for you to consider.
Okay.
Which is, what does the balance between deep and shallow work, look like in your own life right now, in your day-to-day? And take a moment to reflect on how intentionally cultivating more depth in your work could potentially impact your productivity, your career growth and your overall sense of fulfillment. And what are some of those aspects of shallow work that might be hindering your ability to produce your best work, to experience those valuable aha moments, those breakthroughs,
those moments where you really feel like you're making progress.
Exactly.
So this deep dive, hopefully it's provided a foundation for understanding the crucial why behind deep work. And in our future discussions, we'll be exploring the practical how.
The how.
Yeah. Like the specific strategies and techniques you can use to implement more deep work into your daily routine. It's a really powerful step you can take towards a more focused, a more productive, and ultimately a more rewarding life.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that.
Thank you for listening. If this episode resonated with you, the best way to support the podcast is to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every bit of support helps us keep creating content that actually matters. See you in the next one.